put your hands together and let's give a city over's welcome to Dr. Ingrid Skop.
Thank you, Jesse Leon. Can everybody hear me? I appreciate the invitation to speak today, and he's right. I do want to honor my parents. Mom and Dad, you are the most pro-life people I know, and I just adore you guys. They welcomed me. They welcomed my 4 brothers and my sister. Their willingness to welcome children has led to 21 grandchildren. They have their first great-grandchild on the way, and they're just an inspiration. I did have the honor to present to the Congress of the United States a couple of weeks ago. And I want you to know I'm more excited, I think, to be here today because, as my husband pointed out to me, Ingrid, whose mind are you going to change there? And I said, I don't know, but God gave me this opportunity. I've got to follow through. But the reality is that we have a lot of work to do in this country. I think you guys all know that, and that's the reason that you're here. And it's the church that's going to make the difference. Everything I'm going to say today, I have made a PDF of the PowerPoint, and additionally, there's a paper that I've written that has references. So anything I say, if you say, I wonder where she got that, that's kind of odd, I've never heard that. All of that's available to you. I think Jesse Leon said you could reach out to the tech team. My email's up here, and I'm happy to field any questions from you as well. What is abortion? A typical medical definition goes something like this: a surgical or medical procedure that terminates a pregnancy by removing the products of conception. But we all know it is deliberately ending the life of a genetically distinct human within the protection of his mother's uterus. The embryo is a miraculous creation of God. By 21 days after conception, the heart starts beating and pumping blood. By 30 days, arms, legs, and brain are forming. By 35 days, mouth, nose, and ears are developing. By 40 days, you can measure brain waves. By 42 days, all of his parts are present and just need to grow and mature. Around 2 months gestation, the embryo converts to a fetus developmentally. At that point, his hands are completely developed and his fingerprints are forming. By 9 weeks, his fingernails are growing. He can be seen on the sonogram sucking his thumb. At 10 weeks, he squints, swallows, and frowns. And at that point, we can even tell if he's going to be right-handed or left-handed because he has a preferred thumb that he wants to suck. By 12 weeks, he smiles and has intricate hand and feet movements. But we've known all this for decades. Dr. Bernard Nathanson was an abortionist who was instrumental in the Roe decision. Nonetheless, as ultrasound technology increased, he became pro-life because of what he saw in the ultrasound. He wrote a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine where he said, I am deeply troubled by my own increasing certainty that I have in fact presided over 60,000 deaths. About ultrasound, he wrote, for the first time, we could really see the human fetus, measure it, observe it, watch it, and indeed bond with it and love it. And that's what I see in my office. When a woman wants her fetus, she is in love with it from before the time she's ever seen it. So, I think you know the answer to this question. What is this? Is this a political issue or is it a spiritual one? Well, in the oldest book of the Bible, God tells us that what we see on sonogram, he knew. He's clothed us with skin and flesh. He's put us together with bone and nerves. I want you to know that the reason I am pro-life, obviously I care for the fetus. I care for both of my patients. Women in America and across the world are the walking wounded because of this procedure. It is estimated that 1 in 4 American women have had an abortion. Half of these women attend church. 24% are Catholic, 17% Protestant, 13% evangelical. Half of the women who obtain abortion believe that their action is immoral and that it is the killing of a human being, and nonetheless, they fall into this action in crisis. A Barna poll recently demonstrated that 44% of Christians feel that the Bible is ambiguous on abortion. It is estimated that 70% of Americans claim to be Christian, 84% claim they have a biblical worldview, but when you pin them down on these biblical, social, modern issues, it turns out that only about 9% of Christians have a true biblical worldview. I am excited to be speaking to some people I believe that are pastors today and leaders in the Christian ministry. You can tell me if there are other reasons. These are some reasons that I think that pastors don't tend to engage with this issue. In 55 years, I've heard one sermon about abortion. The word abortion casts an immediate pall on any conversation. We don't like to think about it. I understand. My family and my friends are tired of me talking about it. Pastors may feel they don't know enough, and that's true. It's clouded in euphemisms. Very few people know really what's going on. They may feel they will be interpreted as judgmental by those who have experienced this action, both men and women. They may be concerned that its political nature can threaten their tax-exempt status or affect their reputation. But meanwhile, while it's being ignored by the church, many women sitting in the pews have suppressed the conscious examination of this action that they may have performed as a knee-jerk response to a crisis. They have a wound in their soul, and it will fester until they have asked for and received God's forgiveness. Pastors who don't want to address the issue are ignoring God's will to bring their daughters back into fellowship with Him. The Bible that I read is very clear about abortion, even though it does not use the word. Genesis tells us God created mankind in His own image. We are clearly special to Him. The psalmist beautifully describes how He knit us together in our mother's womb, and that He knew all the days we were lived before we were ever born. Jeremiah and Isaiah affirm that God formed them and called them to their ministry from the womb. And Job affirms that not only the prophets, but all of us were formed by God in the womb. I love the beautiful story of the pregnant Elizabeth and the pregnant Mary meeting. And the unborn John the Baptist leaped for joy in the presence of the unborn Jesus. The Bible affirms constantly that children are a heritage, a blessing, not a burden. So how does our society rationalize this action, our supposedly Christian society? Most assume that abortions occur at an early gestational age when the fetus is little more than a clump of tissue. They may justify the decision as the least disruptive choice because women are in crisis and they may have what appear to be only bad options. But the average gestational age for abortion is at 8 weeks, when the heart has already been beating for 2 weeks. Some may trust a woman and her doctor to make the correct decision, but the reality is only 7 to 14% of OB-GYNs will perform an abortion. So in most cases, it's not between a woman and her doctor. Pope Francis was right when he asked, is it okay to hire a hitman to solve a problem? We all know that in 1973, the Supreme Court ignored the fact of human life and redefined a human's right to life based on whether he possessed personhood, a nebulously defined term. This gave stronger humans power over weaker humans based on whether the latter human was wanted. This is false justice. In fact, this is genocide. Abortion not only kills an immature human being, but it causes irreversible damage to women and their relationships, and ultimately it negatively impacts our society as a whole. Disabilities, rape, and incest are often justified as a reason to keep all abortions legal, but in reality, they are less than 1% of the abortions that occur in this country. And even in these difficult situations, the Bible tells us what God thinks. He has a plan for all that He creates, even if it appears imperfect in the eyes of man. Exodus tells us that God asked Moses, who made man's mouth? Who makes the mute, the deaf, the seeing, or the blind? Have not I, the Lord? And Isaiah describes, does the clay say to the potter, what are you making? Does your work say, he has no hands? Woe to him who says to his father, what have you begotten? Or to his mother, what have you brought to birth? This is what the Lord says. Do you question me about my children or give me orders about the work of my hands? Even in the awful case of rape or incest, Deuteronomy tells us that children shall not be put to death for the sins of their fathers. But the reality is almost all abortions in our country occur for social and financial reasons. 3/4 of women obtaining abortions say they cannot afford a child, or that having a child would interfere with school, work, or the ability to care for their dependents. We're reminded that the great sin of the ancient Israelites was their worship of idols and sacrificing their children to obtain pleasure and prosperity. Jeremiah describes how the Israelites had filled the place with the blood of innocents and had passed their sons through the fire as burnt offerings. 86% of women obtaining abortions in our country are unmarried. However unpopular the view may be, God declared that we should limit our sexuality to one partner in a covenantal marriage relationship. As Jesus describes in Matthew, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This relationship, as you know, is a model of his relationship with us, the church, and his will for the sexual instinct that he gave us. Clearly, our society's rejection of God's commandments has led to the conception of many children who are then rejected by their mothers and fathers through abortion. You're all familiar with Romans 1 that gives a vivid description of how our rebellion against God, our desire to live our ways the way we want to, rather than the way he has recommended, has led to much angst. Too many men, unfortunately, refuse to fulfill the role God called them to of loving and protecting the woman with whom they have sexual intercourse and of cherishing the children that are conceived from that union. Many women in abortion clinics report that they would be willing to give birth if only they had the support of the baby's father. Peter tells us, husbands, be considerate as you live with your wives. Treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life. The slogan, my body, my choice, demonstrates our rebellion against God's commands. Thessalonians tells us that we should avoid sexual immorality, that we should learn to control our body in a way that is holy and honorable, not passionate, like the pagans who do not know God. If the Christians were modeling this in our country, just think how different it would look. The end result of this disobedience is that many women do indeed reject a human being, their own child. The scripture finds it hard to believe this could happen because God created women with a strong hormonal attachment to their children. Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion for the child she has born? Trust me, when a woman rejects a child in abortion, her body knows and suffers because of that. The church's failure to emphasize God's will for sexuality within the context of marriage cannot be justified because the scripture is clear about how serious this sin is. Whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. So 10% of U.S. abortions occur after the first trimester, at the time the fetus is developing the ability to feel pain. This is about 86,000 children a year. 1.3% occur after viability, around 22 weeks gestation, when he is able to survive if separated from his mother. This is about 11,000 a year. Our country is now one of only 7 countries in the world, next to China, North Korea, Vietnam, that will allow the elective destruction of an unborn child after viability. Although the average American probably assumes that late abortions are performed solely for severe fetal abnormalities and to protect a mother's health, the truth is almost all are performed for the same elective reasons that earlier abortions are. 58% of women have late abortions to make others happy. 28% say they had the abortion because they feared their partner would leave them if they did not. Allowing this procedure for a full 9 months in our country leaves a coercive man 9 months to convince a woman to abort her child. This fallen world is full of injustice, and the question we often confront is, what would God have us do when we're faced with tragic evidence of this broken world? By looking at the life of Jesus, we see how he behaved when he encountered injustice. Over and over, we see that his first response was compassion. Although sometimes the people he met were suffering consequences of their own rebellious decisions, they were drawn to this gentle aspect of his nature. The Samaritan woman he met at the well, who had been living in sexual sin, nonetheless ran to tell her friends about her interaction with Jesus, leading many to seek him. Once he'd calmed their crisis by showing love, Jesus spoke truth to them. He intervened to save the woman caught in adultery from stoning, but he cautioned her to leave her life of sin. He never hesitated to proclaim God's commandments for how his people should order their lives. He did this in love and in the knowledge that God gave mankind laws because he knew this would result in optimal health and happiness. He also knew that failure to follow God's laws would result in much pain, as we can easily see by looking around us today. Nowhere in the Bible does it give the recommendation that justice requires the death of these children. Psalms tells us, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hands of the wicked. James affirms, you must help the fatherless and not let this world make you evil. These commands are beautifully fulfilled by many pro-life Christians who support pregnancy resource centers, such as the Men's Health Center that we've heard about, that walk with women through their crises, attempting to repair broken relationships and giving them the support they need to give life to their children. This is the true justice that Christ would approve. God's plan for humans is clear, to be fruitful and multiply. He tells us that children are a blessing and that his kingdom belongs to children. Half of the pregnancies that occur in this country are not intentionally conceived, and 40% of these unplanned children are rejected by their mothers through abortion. Yet for those who welcome this unexpected surprise, the resulting child inevitably becomes a blessing for that family. And remember, our faith is based on an unplanned pregnancy. One of the biggest lies circulating about abortion is that it is essential women's health care. Health care is defined as maintenance and restoration of the health of the body or mind. Prenatal care and delivery of babies is health care. Disrupting the normal physiologic process of pregnancy and ending the life of a human being is the antithesis of health care. Again, only 7 to 14% of obstetricians say they will perform an abortion. If abortion were necessary for women's health, every obstetrician would be willing to perform that intervention. The U.S. has the highest maternal mortality rate in the developed world. Did y'all know that? Despite our wonderful healthcare system. Abortion is not the solution. Abortion is part of the problem, as it has been documented to worsen many of the conditions that predispose a woman to maternal mortality. This crisis disproportionately affects Black women, who have a maternal mortality rate 3.3 times that of white women. This disparity has been simplistically attributed to systemic racism. When I pointed this out in Congress, you have no idea how many times I was called a racist that day. Abortion advocates insist that the federal government must expand access and funding for abortion for Black women so that they can rid themselves of their children to combat this crisis. But sadly, Black women already have an abortion rate that is 3.7 times that of white women. Today in America, women are often older and in poorer health from obesity, diabetes, and hypertension when they become pregnant compared to years past. Delayed marriage, contraception, and abortion have allowed many women to delay childbirth until an older age. Nonetheless, if a woman presents with a high-risk pregnancy, abortion should never be the answer. We can do so much better than to tell her she must end the life of her child than to save her own. An entire subspecialty of obstetrics, maternal fetal medicine, is dedicated to helping a high-risk woman and her baby make it safely through a pregnancy and delivery. In the rare event that a pregnancy poses an immediate, serious risk to a woman's life, she can be delivered in a medically standard way by induction or C-section by her own OB-GYN in a hospital. It does not require referral to a poor quality abortionist in an unsupervised abortion clinic. Neonatologists can often save a baby who is born a little over halfway through a pregnancy. Even if he is too young to live, perinatal hospice can ensure that he remains comfortable while his family shows him love and tells him goodbye. This is a far more Christ-like, caring way to handle this difficult situation than intentionally destroying and often dismembering the baby. A widely quoted study performed by abortion advocates reported that abortion is 14 times safer than childbirth by comparing compromised data. It is clear, with the incomplete records available in our country, the political nature of abortion, and the ideologic commitment of many, I would say most researchers, that the question of comparative safety of abortion to childbirth is unlikely to be answered using our data. A more complete, less biased way to look at this question is to perform a records linkage study in a country with single-payer health care and more thorough record keeping, so that records on all reproductive age women and their medical care are readily available to be compared. In Finland, Studies reviewed all death certificates on reproductive age women, and they found the opposite of the previously reported study. When compared to a woman who carried to term, a woman who had an abortion was almost 4 times as likely to die within a year, 6 times as likely to commit suicide, twice as likely to die from an accident, and 4 times as likely to be murdered. Follow-up studies from this data reveal that 94% of abortion-related deaths and 73% of maternal deaths are not identified on death certificates alone. This demonstrates the clear inadequacy of death certificate data that the CDC utilizes to report deaths. Could it be that delivering a baby benefits a woman by improving her emotional health, reducing mental health disorders, and high risk-taking behavior? The risk of death from abortion increases by 38% for every week after 8 weeks gestation. An abortion in the early second trimester is 15 times more likely to result in a woman's death. In the mid-second trimester, 30 times more likely to result in death. And after viability, when he can survive separated from his mother, abortion is 76 times more likely to kill the mother. Abortion provision is often a career of last resort for troubled physicians, particularly those who are willing to perform later abortions. Black women are more likely to have a later abortion at 13% compared with white women at 9%. Thus, deaths directly related to physical complications of later abortions are increased in Black women. Poverty is a risk factor for failure to obtain appropriate medical care, so the extremely high rate of single Black mothers undoubtedly contributes to their poor outcomes. Risk factors for pregnancy complications include obesity, hypertension, and diabetes. These occur more commonly in Black than white women. There may be genetic reasons, but these are also associated with poverty. Pregnancies complicated by these comorbidities are likely to lead to a C-section delivery, which also has a far higher mortality rate. And if a woman without a partner should become ill during pregnancy or in the postpartum period, she may be unable or unwilling to seek emergency care due to lack of social support, child care, or transportation. So how does an abortion cause complications? The physical changes occur as soon as a pregnancy commences, and some risk factors are unique to the intervention of induced abortion, such as the need to force open the strong muscular cervix, which is designed to remain closed until natural childbirth. Causes of severe injury and death from abortion complications can include hemorrhage, infection, blood vessel blockage from emboli, anesthetic reactions or overdoses, and all of these can lead to a heart attack or stroke. Incomplete tissue removal or damage to adjacent organs may also require additional surgery. An early surgical abortion is performed by vacuuming out the fetus in the pregnancy tissue after the cervix has been chemically or mechanically opened. A dilation and extraction, D&E, is necessary when the fetal bones have hardened around 14 weeks gestation and the fetus cannot be removed through suction alone. Non-intact D&E accounts for 9% of the abortions in our country. It's commonly referred to as a dismemberment abortion because it removes the fetus in a piecemeal fashion with instruments. This is a barbaric procedure that is usually performed on a living, pain-capable human being. As the cervix is dilated, instruments can form a false channel, leading to damage to surrounding organs or vessels. Once cervical dilation has occurred, multiple blind passages of the surgeon's instruments can perforate the soft uterus and damage surrounding organs, even in experienced hands. Later in pregnancy, the increased amount of fetal and placental tissue requires greater cervical dilation. The increased blood flow predisposes to hemorrhage, and the relaxed uterine musculature is easier to perforate, all of which contribute to late-term complications. Let's talk about medical or chemical. You've heard how bad surgical abortions can be. These are even worse. Mifepristone, also known as Mifeprex or RU46, blocks progesterone receptors in the uterus, cutting off the hormonal support, causing the fetal death. Misoprostol, Cytotec, is given 24 to 48 hours later, inducing contractions to expel the pregnancy tissue. For the past 20 years, Mifepristone has been regulated by the FDA's Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy, or REMS, which is a safety strategy to decrease the risk of medications known to be dangerous. But using the COVID pandemic as an excuse, as we've seen an excuse for many authoritarian actions, the FDA recently removed the in-person prescribing requirements. This allows distribution without a physical examination, sonogram, or labs. This ignores the risk of underestimation of gestational age, ectopic pregnancy that could rupture, the need for RhoGAM immunoprophylaxis if the woman is Rh negative, or the potential for misuse by others who may benefit from the loss of the child, including sex traffickers, incestuous abusers, and coercive boyfriends. These temporary measures may be made permanent in November. Chemical abortion is being increasingly promoted to women for reasons that benefit the abortionist, but not the woman. They comprise at least 40% of all abortions. Recent data during COVID shows it may be up to 60 to 80%. A surgical abortion is less likely to result in complications and is completed in a much shorter period of time. The average woman undergoing a chemical abortion bleeds for 9 to 16 days. 8% will bleed for longer than a month. If the pregnancy tissue is not completely expelled, there's an increased risk of both hemorrhage and infection, and this often requires surgical completion. Biased studies based on poor quality data published by the U.S. abortion industry, of course, report low complication rates. But better quality international systematic reviews and records linkage studies demonstrate high failure rates. Large Finnish studies reveal that 5 to 8% of first trimester medical abortions fail, requiring surgery, and almost 40% fail if it's accidentally used in the second trimester. Although less than 2% fail at 7 weeks, failures rise to 7% by 10 weeks. And complications are 4 times more likely with a chemical than with a surgical abortion and affect 1 out of 5 women. As I mentioned, the COVID pandemic has been leveraged as an excuse to remove the restrictions and lead women to have a chemical coat hanger. Many of the 1 in 20 women with failed abortions will present to an emergency room, not to the abortionist, bleeding heavily, and I've cared for many of these women. They will often require immediate surgery and sometimes hospitalization for blood transfusion or IV antibiotics. These ongoing efforts to remove these REMS restrictions shows that the abortion industry cares only about widespread abortion access and not the health of women and girls. Safety is no longer a concern in this demonic and eugenic quest to kill as many unborn humans as possible. Abortion can cause long-term complications for a woman. Instrumental trauma to the uterus from abortion can cause faulty adherence of the placenta, leading to premature placental separation, abruption, or placental invasion into the cervix, uterine wall, or adjacent organs and accreta. Both of these conditions can cause catastrophic hemorrhage at the time of delivery. Forcibly opening a cervix that is designed to remain closed until natural childbirth may result in cervical trauma and cervical incompetence in future pregnancies and can lead to preterm birth. Black women are documented to have higher preterm birth rates, leading to much suffering from the complications of prematurity. And obstetric interventions for management of preterm birth can also raise the risk of maternal mortality. There's a possible increased risk of breast cancer after abortion. This may be due to a direct physiologic effect because it arrests breast tissue development in an immature, cancer-prone stage, or because of the known loss of the protective effect if the woman would have carried the pregnancy to term. Breast cancer occurs in 1 in 8 American women, but the pro-choice medical industry is not at all interested in examining a possible link. Black women are diagnosed with breast cancer at younger ages. They are more likely to have a recurrence, and they are more likely to die from their breast cancer. Adverse mental health outcomes, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, overdose, high-risk taking behavior, and suicide are all increased after abortion. 20% of maternal deaths in Texas were due to overdose, suicide, and homicide. 13% of maternal deaths in Illinois were due to homicide, often by a woman's intimate partner. Half of these deaths occurred in Black women. And a teenager is 10 times as likely to commit suicide after an abortion than her non-pregnant peers. I may be running short of time, so I may skip through some of these. Societal cost, you guys have all seen it, increased sexually transmitted infections leading to lifelong health problems and infertility. Unmarried birth has increased from 11 to 40%. Many children are raised without the stabilizing influence of a father, and we can see all these other horrible things that have happened since we decided not to prioritize the life of an unborn child. Abortion has disproportionately, as I've mentioned, affected the Black community, leading to a eugenic decrease in their population numbers. Almost 20 million Black children have been aborted since it was legalized in the United States. To put this in perspective, there were about 18 million Black Americans alive during the civil rights era. So this has definitely had a eugenic consequence. Many of the pathologies affecting Black Americans can be directly traced to the breakdown of the Black family and the absence of paternal involvement. Only 25% of Black children were born to unmarried mothers prior to abortion's legalization, but today, 2/3 are born out of wedlock. The narrative of her body, her choice has apparently led many men to believe that the decision to bear a child belongs to a woman alone. This may leave men less inclined to marry the mother of their child if a pregnancy unintentionally occurs. Additionally, many women who desire their children are coerced into abortion by unwilling partners. Surely, Black women, and all women, do not aspire to raise their children alone, but their high abortion rates and unmarried childbirth rates provide evidence for the failure of many men to fulfill their responsibilities as fathers. Have you ever wondered how it would have felt to be an abolitionist in the time of slavery? In our modern enlightened society, we shudder to consider how the majority of the population at that time were able to ignore the tragedy of slavery. We feel certain we would have never stood by silently. Yet, we can draw some analogies. Slavery, although it tortured and often killed its victims, was tolerated by society because it benefited many financially and made their lives easier. The system had been in place for generations, so some argued it could not be overturned because everyone had grown too accustomed to it. Abolitionists, truthfully, were often considered weird people. Too few pastors and public services or public leaders addressed this issue due to unwillingness to draw attention to themselves with an unpopular opinion. Sometimes they even used the Bible to justify their support. This great book by Eric Metaxas about the British parliamentarian who was instrumental in overturning the slave trade says, Wilberforce realized that Britain was a nation that had effectively lost its conscience or grown deaf to it, that claimed in every outward way to be a Christian nation, but that acted upon principles fundamentally at odds with the Christian view of human beings as immortal creatures created in the image of God. I think it is likely that future generations will look back on us with the same perplexity. They will fail to understand how we stood by and allowed the widespread slaughter of a group of human beings for largely social and financial reasons. As they read our news articles decrying racism and advocating for poor Black and minority members of our society, they will wonder how we tolerated the cognitive dissonance of performing a search and destroy mission on this population's unborn children. Without the haze of semantic obscuration, they will surely see that we have turned a blind eye to the genocide of Black and minority Americans while virtue signaling our solidarity with this population, even as we destroyed its youngest members. So the question, I believe, is where are we? What's going on with the church? The churches in Revelation, I always fascinated because I can see so many components of where we are. The church at Pergamon committed sexual immorality. The church at Thyatira had a woman who taught and misled the servants into sexual immorality. The church at Laodicea was a lukewarm, not very involved church. It thought it was rich, it had everything it needed. It didn't need to address this issue, perhaps. Matthew tells us, Jesus said, in the end times, the love of most will grow cold. What better description of love grown cold is the large-scale rejection of children by their own mothers? In the past 50 years, we have killed nearly 65 million of our children. Think of this extraordinary number of God's precious creatures that he was knitting together with love, who were destroyed because of man's selfish pursuit of their own pleasure. I won't go too much further. I think you guys get the point, but it's imperative that the church stand up and address this issue. The time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a large number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. When we hear about religious organizations such as the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Rights, we realize that many in the church have lost their way. It's time for us to rise up and address the greatest human rights violation of all time, which is occurring under our watch while we ignore its existence. Women are in crisis, and abortion, while offered by many as the solution, stands in contradistinction to God's commands in his word. We must do better to proclaim God's will for sexuality, to support women in the crisis of an unintended pregnancy, and to allow God's precious children, whom he knew before the creation of the world, to be born. Deuteronomy tells us, I think this is my mom's favorite verse, I call heaven and earth to witness against you, here today that I set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, that you and your offspring may live. And we're told, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. I have a hard time getting through this without crying. The question remains, do women want abortion? Not like she wants a Porsche or an ice cream cone. Like an animal caught in a trap, trying to gnaw off its own leg. A woman who seeks abortion is trying to escape a desperate situation by an act of violence and self-loss. Abortion is not a sign that women are free, but a sign that they are desperate. I have about 5 minutes left. I was going to, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about what's going on politically and legislatively, because I think we're in the midst of that fight. As you well know, in '73, the Supreme Court in the Roe v. Wade decision overturned all 50 states' existing laws. There were 11 states, by the way, that did allow abortion in some form, but the Supreme Court decided that they knew better. They said that abortion cannot be restricted at all in the first trimester, that it can be regulated only if it protects the health of the woman in the second trimester. And in the third trimester, finally, the state can regulate abortion in order to protect the fetus, who is now viable. But a companion case released the same day, Doe v. Bolton, said that abortion must be allowed if it would benefit the health of the mother. They defined health broadly, not just physical, but emotional, psychological, familial, and age. Thus, that justifies almost any abortion. Another important case happened in '92. It was felt at that time that maybe this one would overturn Roe. But instead, it reaffirmed Roe on the basis of stare decisis, that is, let the decision stand. The precedent had been set, and we can't overturn it. They reasoned that people had organized their intimate relationships and made choices based on the ability that if they chose not to use contraception or if it failed, that they could always obtain an abortion. They also said that regulations on abortion cannot impose an undue burden on women. And this phrase here has been used to overturn most of the abortion restrictions that the states have made. Federally, you know that not much good is going on. The Republicans have tried to advance the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, and it has gone nowhere. This means that if an abortionist fails in his job and does not kill the baby before it's born, that he is free to kill the baby afterwards and commit infanticide. Congress recently passed the Women's Health Protection Act to codify Roe. Fortunately, I think Joe Manchin may stand up, and I don't think it's going to pass the Senate, but the fact that we are so close to codifying this is very concerning. And of course, President Biden and many others have called Texas restrictions an unprecedented assault on a woman's constitutional rights. The good news is, on the state level, a lot of good stuff is happening. The Guttmacher Institute is the research arm of the abortion industry. On their website, they stated, state policy trends at mid-year 2021, already the worst legislative year ever for abortion rights, which means that it's the best year for us. There have been 90 state-level abortion restrictions passed this year, and you can see that your state is well represented. I'm very proud of you guys. There have been near total abortion bans. There have been heartbeat bans. There have been trigger bans that will go into place if Roe is overturned. There have been gestational age bans, bans for eugenic reasons such as Down syndrome and fetal abnormality. Many states have recognized the impending danger of the FDA removing the REMS restrictions and have put restrictions back in place for medical abortion use. But the reality is that almost every time a state passes legislation, it is immediately litigated and often enjoined by activist judges. Restrictions are occasionally allowed, such as waiting periods, parental consent, required ultrasounds, but any ban, anything that says at this gestational age we will not allow an abortion, they have all been rejected as unconstitutional until September 1st. I love Oklahoma. I'm from Oklahoma. I'm also extremely proud to be a Texan. We were the first state in 50 years that has been able to enact a ban on abortion, our heartbeat ban. As you know, it's being vigorously attacked, but so far it's still in place. So this year, on December 1st, the Supreme Court is going to hear Mississippi's Dobbs v. Jackson, and please hold that up in prayer. It's a 15-week ban. I mean, honestly, if we can't even limit this procedure at 15 weeks, I mean, what is going on? It does have exception for life and health of the mother. I mean, there's no reason in the world that this could not be, I'm not going to say reasonable because none of these are reasonable, but this is the case that should overturn Roe. But you all know, we can't win this legislatively. We're only going to win it on our knees. And I think we are only going to win it as we educate the average American about what is going on, about how extreme it is. And that's why I've spoken to you today. I hope that you learned something from this, that there was something that you said, I had no idea that was happening in our country. And if that's the case, get the PowerPoint PDF, send it to your friends. We have got to let people know what's going on. And I'm happy, I know there's no time for questions, but I'm happy to field questions via my email if you guys have any questions. I'm not afraid of hard questions, so if I said something that offended you or that you don't agree with, I'm happy to respond to that too. Thank you.